For managing the discussion and answers session ad Andrea Di Vecchia. Andrea, please. I think that you are the right person to manage this session. An old person, but also the right one, because he is an engineer, born as an engineer, but during his life did a lot of different things than engineering.
Like
and
you.
Working, yes, working, but I'm not an engineer. Working for more than 40 years in development cooperation in Africa and knowing very well the different environment where all these things we are speaking about should be implemented. So the context, I understand, is very important for all the different aspects that we were thinking about. So, Andrea, please.
Thank you.
I stay with you, but
sure,
you manage it. And remind that you have people on Zoom. I don't think that they can see you very well. And yes. So please post your questions on the chat. So if we have questions in the room, please we'll start with your questions. Otherwise, we will try to stimulate a bit of discussion.
Well, I start not with a question, but we just acknowledging it's very interesting. It's particularly interesting because there are different approaches and different, important and try to figure out how they could meld together. In the sense that you start from the first one, talking about very local situation, or starting from almost at village level, and that we end up to arrive to the world level. And now these make systems could really work together, or they have to be in parallel in order to be manageable. That is really a question, because the impact is locally, the analysis could be globally, and like the climate change, you know where to start, but you don't know where you end up with the impacts. So I open the floor for questions from your side.
So,
okay.
Introducing our director, Giorgio Matteucci, the director of the Institute of Biomicrobiology.
One point that it's, I think, could be a common ground in all the presentation, at which moment and how the local people is involved in all these analysis. We have some example, but I mean, I think that the risk assessment, both, let's say, in practical terms, but also in sociological terms, needs the involvement of people. So you have shown the maps that have been sketched by the people interviewed, but I think that to really understand the impact of this kind of risk needs the effective involvement of people. How this can be achieved in different conditions, like I mean, now here or in Genoa, for example, there could be more, let's say, social interaction also on social media, while on in Africa, Niger, or other places, you need to really go on the ground to talk with people. And how this can be made effective to improve the, let's say, acknowledgement of that risk exists and how to interact with risk and to moderate risk and impacts. It's a question not to a specific person, but just for the discussion.
We can do, I suppose that we should use this in
Okay.
the room, otherwise people on Zoom cannot understand. I leave you answer.
In our case, the involvement of population is key element, because if we understand social impacts the way we do, the way people experience the effects of, in this case, a flooding event, you can't know that, you can't understand the impacts if you don't ask them. So from the beginning of we didn't have time to talk about the different stages of social assessments, but our beginning, usually in the baseline study, we start identifying baseline and stakeholder analysis, where you're going to identify the key stakeholders that need to be in the process to identify and analyze the impacts, but not in a complete social assessment. The role of the population or the affected population is not only in the identification, but also in the negotiation, establishment of agreements and actions to manage the impacts. So in this kind of constructivist and participatory approaches to social assessment, they are involved all the way through the process. And on the house and in the team, we have a lot of experience in this kind of social assessment that involve people from the beginning to the end. And when I say people, I'm not saying only affected population, also stakeholders throughout the decision-making process or the chain of decision, and experts, and we do a full stakeholder analysis to understand who needs to be in the process to identify, analyze, and propose actions for the impact, and so also to monitor the actions that have been agreed to be developed really take place the way they were negotiated and decided to be done. So in our case, that will be the case. We also we have a very local context approach. We usually work at the local level. Actually, I don't think I said that, but in this project, we are aiming at local managers. So, but obviously there are different levels. So I also wondered in my colleagues' presentations, and had some of them a more global approach, how that would be possible. In local level, it's more intuitive. But in the global level, that's the key question. So I don't know if you want to.
So thank you for the question. I was trying to reflecting while you're talking. The first thing is that when talking about early warning, we see that the last mile is very, key and crucial. And we actually made some very good progress in talking here, especially for Europe or Italy, particularly trying to predict the events. And we are now, I would say, able to predict quite well the events. The hazard part of the event. What didn't function, for example, in January 2011 was, civil protection plans activation that were not really shared with the population. So from that point, we start. There is a department of our institution that really focuses on the engagement of population and how to develop an emergency plan that is really participated by the population. So I think this is the key, and how, I mean, population can provide a key role in adding local knowledge, but also receiving knowledge from the studies, so that, I mean, we create this kind of awareness that is essential when then we have to activate it. We have to activate an emergency plan or something happens. People have to be displaced, or people have to be evacuated from one place to the other. For the experience at national level and global level, I would talk about, I mean, more at the national level in Africa. We have, I mean, working at national level, we cannot talk of the whole population at time, but we identify key stakeholders and that are representative for the groups of population. So, and we producing, I mean, workshops that were, and in these 6 years that we work there, we produce a lot of workshops and consultation with the stakeholders that are key in the role of taking decision on one side or receiving the decision on the other side, and how they can, on one side, contributing to the knowledge, giving also, I mean, concrete data set, on the other side, how they can use this information to develop different policies and education policies.
Okay, thanks to the director for this question. In our experience, I would like to recall what many decades Sherry Ernstein said about participation. In her old writing, she recalled us the ladders for participation. And as I recall in my short introduction to FRA, participation could not be intended as singling out what are the main problems of a community. I think that, and this was our experience, that local communities should be engaged in more elevated ladders of participation. Why not, let's say, empower them, if we can use this term, a bit top down, in deciding what is best among the panel, the palette of potential actions for them. This is very interesting for experts, because I can just provide an example. Talking about flash floods, we know in our experience, common experience, is enough that we pay a little attention to Ligurian smaller towns. If you look at the door of buildings, they are used to be protected by a door barrier in case of flood. Of course, this is not going to avoid damages as it happens in the 2019, if I remember, flood. That was perhaps a 6 meter arc in some location. And the first and the second floor were totally flooded by a mud slide. But for common floods, it's good. It's a traditional way to protect the entrance of buildings. And so we proposed that. But discussing with the communities, we learned that was not accepted. They don't want it. It's not feasible for their way of life, for the way of living. And that was the same for several other traditional measures. So participation, I mean, going to the point, need to be elevated to decision-making as well. To decision-making, we want this, we refuse this, because this is the reason. And so this is exactly what we try to do at the local scale. Local scale matters, I think. Local scale is important. Local scale, just to bridge to another point that I noticed in some presentation. Local scale is the way to validate the upper level scales. So if you take some informations that we use when we act at a regional or at a state scale, and we verify what does it mean, what does it capture when you use it, when you check at a local scale, you get astonished about the quality of information at a more general level. Because it's impossible to validate that kind of information. And not because of the precision, but because sometimes very general upper scale information, population, or how can I say, exposure, provide you an opposite, even completely opposite results when you are going to measure the same topic, the same information at local scale. This is what we discover. And so I break an arrow in favor of the local scale.
Great. Now we have from the Zoom who is arriving comments from Valentina Grasso. Parola a Valentina.
Mi sentite? Hello to
Bene.
hello to everybody. I'm very sorry that I haven't the chance to meet in person Guadalupe Antonio. It's been a pleasure for me to hear your presentation. And I would be the one in the room of your side, one of us with a sociological background, let me say, like other people in the room I know that are there. But we will have maybe a chance to meet another time. I'm appreciated a lot your presentation, and I don't know if I missed something maybe, and you already answered to my question in your presentation. Anyway, I was wondering how in the project, do you, if you have experience to put together the different perspective from people of the community with the researcher and let me say the managers, the risk managers, civil protection, for example, or you mentioned the mayors that of course have a different perspective also. I would say not only in terms of knowledge background that are of course different among all the people involved, but let me say about the value that are very often not the same. From the, for example, the manager perspective, they choose respect certain values, while people on the ground, they have, of course, different priorities. You were mentioning the pets, for example, but there are a lot of different also things. So I was wondering, how have you managed this aspect if you have, for example, participation meeting or focus group, or what is your experience about this important topic, let me say, also for the communication aspect? Because when we try to communicate risk, let me say that usually researcher like classical natural science or risk science researcher, they tend to focus on the content of the information. So how, which is the risk, the numerical aspect of the risk, but it's difficult to communicate risk because values and perspective are different. So, I mean, I was wondering, how do you manage all these different aspects? Thank you.
So,
Hi, Valentina. It was a pity not to meet you here. Really was helpful to you. And I think we have a very common landmark. So it's not an easy task what you were asking about. First of all, I would say that for us, it's very difficult to differentiate between knowledge and value. There's no neutral knowledge in the aspects that we are working with. The mere identification of an impact as important or relevant by someone is incorporating a value within a project. And that happens with every stakeholder we work with. So values are incorporated the moment they identify the impacts the way they do. However, there's also an ethical position that all scientists take when they decide to conduct a project. And in our case, we are very clear on this, that our priority is on the most vulnerable people. So if something has to be prioritized, is that perspective that comes from most vulnerable people in our case. But obviously, in this case, it's all mixed together because it's a project aimed at managers. So what we want to do is to convey the priorities and necessities and impacts suffered by the population so that managers can take decisions. So it's a way of pushing those that are the most vulnerable and usually the most invisible in the decision-making processes into the decision-making process. So that's part of the ethical perspective. I think Antonio agrees with me in this. But I think it's interesting or important to highlight this idea that from our point of view and from the way that we conceptualize and define what a social impact is, it's impossible to separate knowledge from values. It's incorporated into this, which is a very different approach to the analysis of impacts. And in more practical terms, in more technical terms, how do we incorporate this into the process? We do this in very different ways. Sometimes we do this through focus groups and workshops, and sometimes we do this through qualitative interviewing, which is one of the most common tools that we use for collecting data or collecting information, and all these dynamics of causal maps that we've presented are usually one of the ways of incorporating things into the process. And also in this project, I didn't have the time to explain this, but we have different validation dynamics throughout the project in which we give back the results to the stakeholders, and they feedback. They give us their feedback so that we can incorporate the information into the results. We have these at different stages of the project, obviously throughout the social impact assessment, but also with the elaborate creation of this online tool that we want to create, this Discover Web. We have different validation and workshops with different stakeholders. So that would be, I don't know if I answered your question, but that would be both in ethical or don't know how to put this, but in more general theoretical terms and also in more technical terms.
Yes, thank you, Guadalupe. I hope we will have a chance to have another meeting and discuss some of this stuff together. Thank you.
Thanks, Guadalupe, because I think to agree largely what you try to explain to Valentina. I think that if you involve communities, in my case, in our case, in a flood risk assessment, it is itself the way to communicate risk. Because listening to communities, you can learn, you as from an external point of view, comparing to that of those communities, you can learn a lot the common system a community have to talk with the community members. And so we know we have standardized systems to talk with communities that are similar to our communities. But when you are getting in touch, or you work for, or you accompany other communities in other cultural contexts and economic contexts, I think that you need to put yourself in a listening position and be aware that you can learn from it. This is something that risk reduction experts and planners and other actors, foreigners from the given context, need to keep in mind every time. That you can, through a participation process, you can learn more than giving. So this is, let's say, my contribution to, if I will get the question of Valentina Grasso.
Well, thank you, Valentina. Domanda, no, I have first of you. Then I'm going to just I have a comment and a question. I started to be involved with disaster in 1984. I was at the time on the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Cooperation Department. And my first assignment, I was called in for the drought in Africa. The problem was that, and at the same time, we immediately refer to somebody else that asked for support, scientific support. And we addressed to IATA. IATA was the grandfather of the actual Institute of Bioeconomy. And with Professor Maracchi. And we request, what was the problem? The problem was that the millions of persons, not thousands, millions, were at risk, not at risk, were in completely problem from Ethiopia to Mauritania. And this international coalition was working on two stages. One is how to mobilize interventions. That means moving in food in West Africa and Eastern Africa. And at the same time, developing an international effort in cooperation for everyone. That means, and in the case of CNR, moved toward super simplified the models in order to detect area risk. The problem was not too much to do early warning, but to respond, to have an early warning effective for the dimension of the problem, of the disaster. And finally, from the agency moving food, the problem was not to have enough food, but how to deliver the food. And that was the problem, because the airport, African ports were blocked for too many ships bringing food, and there was not the capacity to move the food. And in that were the limits of early war. And that comes to become, and the discussion at the national level, but basically we were working with America, with all the countries were together, with that time with a workstation, not with the laptop or something like that, to simplify the activity. And second element, we probably would not anymore be confronted with a dimension of a disaster like that, for the, say, dimension, territorial dimension, and number of people involved. And I was basically moving up and down from Rome and Sahel, because we were centered on Sahel intervention. And at that time, I still ask myself if actually the early warning systems are so effective and being so early to respond, even if the dimension of the disaster are less, say, gigantic than before. And because the question is, early means is enough before in order I can mobilize to whatever is necessary to confront the problem. And this aspect, it seems to me that is not really, doesn't found a ground to put together the two parts, the relief and the early warning. And these are the limit of the disaster that we keep having around. We have in Ischia lately, something that was well known, but became a disaster and people died. So it's a question if, in your opinion, are we at a level having now communication that is extremely advanced with respect to that time? That time we know the information came mostly from the people than from the authorities, because it was so distant. There was no communication. It's coming. We have to move everything around. In your opinion, now we are advanced to be able to intervene on time in a disaster, and B, with early warning system, and B, if we are able to respond in case of a, say, a major disaster that we are not usually to confront actually. We have a flood, we are used to have, say, Genoa, we have Florence, we have everywhere, but it's a limited area in a way. It's not so something impacting on the, I say, the region, Europe. And that is a question for you. In your opinion, where are we?
For all of you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of you.
Someone else?
Okay, it's a very interesting question about relating the lead time to the dimension of and the size of the problem. So I think that with the European, talking about Europe now, with the European civil protection mechanism, and especially with the new release of the European civil protection legislation, in the recent year, we have made a lot of step forward to face a huge problem, at least in Europe. There are mechanisms, the ERCC, I mean, is coordinating this effort. They are actually trying to, when something happens, inside Europe, but also outside Europe. They're trying to match the demand of assistance with the offer of the assistance that other countries can provide. And there is a, let's say, well-organized procedure. I mean, I think here the key point that you were, let's say, not mentioning, but underlining anyway, was standard operating procedure. How we can, in a standardized way, face these huge transnational disasters. And I think in Europe, I mean, with this setup, we are going in that direction. I don't say that, I mean, we are already achieving the goal, but we are making very, very good progress. For example, I would say big forest fire, right? I mean, now Europe, not national, I mean, they have a fleet that can be borrowed by the national level. So, when there is forest fire season coming, and depending on the forecast and that we have, I mean, these fleet, I mean, these aircrafts are being, the water bombers are displaced in the German region. In Italy can host 1 or 2 of those. The other are in Greece. If, I mean, the forecast change, they move to Portugal, for example. And those are, this is really coordinated at European level. Plus, we have also these, say, compensatory funds. There's something, I mean, and this is really related to economic losses again. I mean, I think Italy is one of the countries that benefit the most these compensatory, let's say, funds. That's when an earthquake struck, they see, I mean, there is this solidarity fund that is activated and it can be compensated. So I think there are mechanisms both on financial level and on really the response on the field that are now ready for these, let's say, big event. Now, moving outside Italy, the situation is very complicated because everything is based on F4, let's say, less F4 way. For example, European Commission, but also US, or, I mean, I would say most developed, economic developed country. I don't know if I can use this word. We understand each other. They are priorities that depend on the political, but they try to provide this effort. I mean, this assistance also outside Europe. And this is why they do monitor the entire world and what's happening in the hazards. I mean, the natural hazard side, all these type of events that can become a crisis situation, they can impact also Europe, but also, I mean, for assistance and humanitarian aid can be and this is more, let's say, a voluntary basis. So there are normally, if something's happening in one country, there are other countries that are able to or want to contribute. They organize a team of volunteers, they send volunteers, and they try to face this problem. What we are seeing in what we're doing in Africa is something really at an early stage. We are very baby step on this process. But the idea of the African Union and be something similar to what has been built in Europe, and they try to put this solidarity fund together, which is not easy, of course. They try to have this mechanism of transfer of experts and volunteers in case of one disaster striking one country or the other. Now this is happening on bilateral basis. There is no regional or continental coordination. which is good. I mean, it's not bad, but it could be improved with the continental coordination.
Thank you. Very interesting. So I really I'm amazed from by your description of this example about wildfires and so on, and the progresses that has been made at European scale. But anyway, I think that these progresses needed to be observed from the local point. I don't want to be again to take the discussion back at this scale. I think that if you go to see what happens at the local scale, let's take Italian context about wildfires. I think it should be very interesting for you to adapting your approach to understand this. When you are in a situation where you have every day a fire, every day. And as I experienced in southern Lazio, the region of Rome, a couple of years ago, a sunny and bit dry season in that region, in summertime. Every day a fire, but not distant, in the same area. Well, the plane never comes. The helicopter with the water bombs never comes. And local people wait for the fire end by itself without doing nothing, because the fireman coming was 2 persons with a car. 2 persons, 2, one and a volunteer, 2. And so then I think we needed to investigate what happens during the last years that brought the take away the competencies for local fire fighting to the local administrations. Because this happens in our country. Something happens. It should be a perfect example, a perfect study for you, and for us too, to make this from the fact, this parkour back, to find the root reasons. And root reasons are far away. You go back, you take the politician decision at country scale to save money. And the result is that. So I think perhaps at European level something has improved, but at national scale, is it really improved everywhere when wildfire starts? Is really improved? This is my question. Could be a research question for us.
For the next seminar. We have time for a last short question.
Okay, thank you again for your presentation. And I would like to ask a very specific question regarding the link between individuals and communities. What in your mind is the role of practice? I mean, disseminating or engaging individuals through a process where practice is a fundamental pillars in order to build, let me say, more consciousness communities. Which, in your opinion, is the role of this kind of element? I mean, the practice of knowing or learning or something like that.
I think that's something that we will be able to answer by the end of the project. That's the objective of the project, identifying these areas which are how to help people respond better in the face of a disaster. For us and for the all the researchers working on adaptive capacities, that's the key point. Understanding that the most efficient way to ensure the minimization or to avoid social impacts is by making more resilient communities, and that means people using their resources, acting in a more efficient way and preventing the impacts and prepare for them and being able to adapt to changes. From our point of view, it's obviously essential. This is not a theoretical problem, not a conceptual problem. Obviously, it's important to think on those levels, but it's important to make sure that we are efficient in the practical level. I don't know if that's. In our case, we are working in a case study in which there is a very recent memory of the event. And this is also a key point. If people have experienced the impacts recently, they are more, maybe we would say that their adaptive capacities are better than in those areas in which they've never experienced. Obviously, this is a non-mensurable, again, it's not a non-mensurable element, the knowledge and previous experience or memory of the impact. There will be more, they are ready to act because they know with the information that they have now, they would have acted differently in the past, and now they will act differently in the future. So this is the mind, their mind. Yes. Sometimes people make the same mistakes over and over again, obviously. And because there are elements that, for example, there might be cultural elements that won't make them
Or no choice.
change. Yes.
Or no choice.
Or no choice, for example, obviously. So, but that's the objective. It would be to identify those elements in which we can change practice. That would be the
No.
May I to ask you detail? In your experience, you find that there are more, there is more resilience in people that are experienced regularly, they have frequency of disaster, or in people that have never experienced a disaster?
I think that depends on many elements. For example, we've been in Chile 2 weeks ago. We were there, and we were surprised by the level of awareness that people have towards earthquakes, which is something that for them, an earthquake is something that happens every day.
Every day.
So obviously they have much more knowledge than we do of what they should do in an earthquake situation. So I would say that obviously experience is something that helps you act in face of a disaster. But as Diego was saying, there are elements, structural elements that might make it impossible for you to act because I don't have the resources, economic resources, material resources, or I don't know, there are many others that could, even though I know what I would do in this situation, I don't have the possibility to do it. So I don't think there's a universal response to a question. Yeah, sometimes with the safety paradox, maybe it's translated this idea that if we feel that we are very safe,
the
That-
structural
Yes, because we have,
tsunami,
Um,
tsunami barriers, for
for example, then we think that we are protected, so we forget about the threat, or we are less ready to act because we think that we are already protected, that those measures can fail also. So I don't know. It's a very hard question.
That's a
to
good
ask.
example for in case also for flooding, in case of dikes protecting cities, people feeling very comfortable, and then when you have an overtopping
Mhm.
because of an extreme discharge or a disruption of the system, so that you have more damages than expected because people feel very, very secure.
In the case of the case study that we are using in the south of Alicante, this fire that happened in 2019, the disastrous effects were because a river wall broke. So it took everyone by surprise because the structural measure had failed and everyone trusted the structural measure. So, well, that
But they keep thinking that the structural
measure
measure is going to be the solution.